The gunshot cracked across the Montana plains, and Harriet Everett ran. She ran from the church, from the altar, from the man she was supposed to marry. Her white wedding dress, a symbol of a future that had just turned to ash, billowed behind her. This was 1875, and a woman didn't just run from her wedding. But Harriet wasn't just any woman. And this wasn't just any wedding. Tears blurred the rugged landscape, but she didn't slow. Every ragged breath was a gasp for freedom. The taste of betrayal was coppery in her mouth. She had to get away. Behind her, a voice roared her name. Harriet! It was Wade Kincaid, the man who had promised her a life of partnership, of respect. The man who, she now knew, had bought her like a piece of livestock. She pushed harder, the silk of her dress catching on sagebrush, the thin slippers on her feet shredding against the sharp rocks. The small mining town of Silver Creek was a smudge in the distance, a place of lies she could never return to. She'd rather face the unforgiving wilderness, the coyotes and the cougars, than the smile of the man who had purchased her future. The thunder of hooves grew louder. He was coming for her. Of course he was. He had to protect his investment. Wade spurred his horse, his face a mask of grim determination. He was a cowboy, born and bred, with 15 years of dust and storms etched into his skin. He'd faced down outlaws and blizzards without flinching. But the sight of Harriet fleeing from him, her face a canvas of terror and rage, was a storm he'd never reckoned with. She was the woman who had somehow lassoed his heart 3 years ago, and now she was running like the devil himself was on her heels. "Harriet, stop!" he yelled, his voice rough against the wind. "You're going to hurt yourself." But his concern sounded like a threat. She scrambled over a ridge, her lungs on fire. For 22 years she had done what she was told, first by her father, then, after her parents died, by her uncle. She was a tool, an asset, a responsibility to be managed. She thought Wade was different. When he'd ridden into Silver Creek, his quiet strength and gentle eyes had felt like a sunrise after a long night. He made her believe she could be more than just her uncle's shopkeeper. He made her believe in love. Until last night, hidden in the shadows of the storeroom, she'd heard it all. Wade and her Uncle Frederick, their voices low, sealing the deal. Her future discussed like a line item in a ledger. Her uncle bragging about the gambling debts Wade would absorb. All he had to do was take Harriet off his hands. "I trusted you," she screamed over her shoulder, not breaking her stride. "I will not be sold like cattle." The horse was on her in seconds. A strong arm, born of years wrestling steers, wrapped around her waist. She was lifted from the ground in one sickeningly smooth motion, the world tilting as he pulled her onto the saddle in front of him. She fought. She hammered her fists against the hard wall of his chest, kicking her legs, but it was like beating against a mountain. "Let me go," she cried, her voice cracking with desperation. "I heard you. I heard everything. You and my uncle trading me like a sack of flour." Wade didn't let go. He just held her, his grip firm but not bruising, as he steered the horse away from town, deeper into the wilderness. He was taking her away from any chance of help. The thought sent a fresh wave of ice-cold terror through her. "Is that what you think?" he finally said, his voice low and strained. "That I'd marry you to settle a debt?" "I heard you," she spat back, her blue eyes blazing with a fire fueled by hurt. $500. That was my price, wasn't it? $500 to clear his gambling debts and take me off his hands. Wade's face, which had been a storm of confusion and anger, suddenly cleared. A strange look of understanding dawned in his eyes. He didn't deny it. He just changed the horse's direction, heading toward a small grove of cottonwood trees shimmering by a creek. It was a place of quiet beauty, and right now it felt like a trap. He dismounted at the water's edge, lifting her down before she could protest. She stumbled back, wrapping her arms around herself, the beautiful white dress now a ruined mess of dirt and tears. "Now you listen to me, Harriet Everett," Wade said, and his tone wasn't angry anymore. It was deadly serious. "Your uncle owes me nothing. I've never gambled a day in my life with that man." Harriet stared at him, her mind reeling. It had to be a trick, a lie to calm her down before he dragged her back to the church to complete the transaction. "I know what I heard," she insisted, her voice trembling. "You heard half a conversation," Wade countered, taking a step closer. She flinched back. "The $500. That was me paying him, not the other way around." The world stopped spinning. The birds in the cottonwoods went silent. What was he saying? It didn't make any sense. A groom didn't pay the bride's family. That wasn't how it worked. Unless it was a dowry in reverse, a payment for damaged goods. The thought was even more humiliating. "Paying him," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "Paying him for what?" Wade ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of pure frustration. "For the store, Harriet. I bought his mercantile." This new piece of information hit her like a physical blow. The store was her life, her prison, but hers all the same. Since her aunt had passed, she'd kept it running while her uncle drank away the profits. It was the only thing she had left of her family. "You bought my store." "I bought it so he could pay off his real debts," Wade continued, his voice urgent, "and leave town. It's what he's wanted to do since your aunt died. He's been miserable, Harriet, but he wouldn't go. He didn't want to leave you with nothing." The pieces were clicking into place, but they were forming a picture she couldn't comprehend. "So, part of the arrangement was that you'd take care of me?" she asked, the words tasting like poison. "Not like that," Wade said, shaking his head fiercely. "I told him I loved you. I told him I intended to court you proper and marry you if you'd have me. The store. The store was going to be my wedding gift to you, something that was yours and yours alone, something no one could ever take away from you." She stared at him, the fury in her chest slowly being replaced by a dizzying wave of confusion. Could this be true? It was a story so much kinder than the one she had believed. But if it was true, the cruelty of the secret was a betrayal all its own. "Why?" she whispered. "Why wouldn't you tell me?" "Your uncle. He wanted to tell you himself after the wedding," Wade explained, his eyes pleading with her to understand. "He was afraid. He thought you'd refuse to let him leave if you knew. He thought you'd insist on taking care of him, just like you have for the past 5 years. He knew you'd put his needs before your own happiness." And the most painful part was, he was right. She would have. She had spent the last 5 years shelving her own dreams to keep a roof over her uncle's head, to keep the store from crumbling around them. She had sacrificed everything for him. "I would have," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I know," Wade said softly, taking another tentative step forward. "That's why I agreed to his fool plan. It felt wrong, keeping you in the dark. It's the reason I've felt like I've been walking on eggshells for a month. But I did it because I love you." He paused, his gaze locking with hers. "I've loved you since the day you threw that pitcher of water on me for tracking mud into the store." A ghost of a smile touched her lips at the memory. "You ruined a whole bolt of calico." "Worth every penny," he said, a genuine smile finally breaking through his worried expression. "Just to see that fire in your eyes. It's the same fire I see in them right now." The adrenaline that had fueled her desperate flight was gone, leaving a bone-deep exhaustion in its place. Her anger had been a shield, and without it, she felt raw and exposed. "I don't know what to believe," she confessed. Wade closed the remaining distance between them, his calloused hands gently taking hers. They were warm and strong, and they didn't feel like the hands of a monster. believe this," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. "We were married in my soul long ago, Harriet Everett. From the moment I saw you stand up to Jackson Tyler when he was bullying that Indian boy. From the day I watched you spend your last dollar on medicine for old Mrs. Hatcher instead of buying yourself a new ribbon. I knew then. I knew you were the woman I wanted to spend my life with." Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of anger. They were tears of a hope so fragile she was afraid to breathe. But the secret, Wade. Why keep a secret that big? "Because I'm a damn fool," he admitted, his voice raw with regret. "I've spent my life on the move, following herds, not people. I'm not good with words, Harriet. I'm not good with feelings. But I know what's true in my heart. And what's true is you. Not because of some deal, not because of your uncle. Just you. The bravest, kindest, most stubborn woman I've ever known." She looked up into his hazel eyes, searching for the lie. But all she saw was sincerity, etched into the lines of his sun-weathered face. She remembered the man who had repaired the schoolhouse roof after a storm, who always had a kind word for the children, who stood up to the mining company when they tried to cheat the local ranchers. That was the Wade Kincaid she knew, the man she had fallen in love with. How could she have believed him capable of such cold-hearted cruelty? "I don't want to be owned," she said, the words coming from the deepest part of her. "Not by my uncle, not by you." "I don't want to own you," Wade replied, his grip on her hands tightening slightly. "I want to stand beside you. I want to build something with you, something we can only build together." A sudden gust of wind rustled the cottonwood leaves, sending them spiraling around their feet. Harriet closed her eyes, the weight of the last 24 hours, the last 5 years, pressing down on her. The truth was a complicated, messy thing. It wasn't the clean-cut villainy she'd imagined. It was a tangled web of good intentions and bad decisions. "I need time," she said finally, her voice clearer now. "Time to think, to understand." Disappointment flickered in Wade's eyes, but he nodded. He respected her wish. "I understand. I'll take you back to town, not to the church, to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, if you like." She glanced down at her ruined dress, then thought of the church full of whispering townspeople, the judgment, the questions, the pity. It was too much. She couldn't face them. Not yet. "No," she said, a new resolve hardening her voice. "Not back to town." Wade raised an eyebrow. "Where then?" An idea, wild and sudden, bloomed in her mind. A place of truth. A place where she could remember who she was before she became just Frederick's niece. "My parents' old homestead," she said. "It's been abandoned for 10 years, but the cabin should still be standing. It's a day's ride north of here." "Alone?" Wade asked, his voice laced with concern. She looked him straight in the eye. "With you. I need answers. And I have a feeling I won't find them in Silver Creek. I need to get away from my uncle's shadow to figure this out." He studied her for a long, silent moment. She could see the calculations in his eyes, the weighing of risks. Finally, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right, Harriet. We'll need supplies. There's a trapper's cabin an hour from here. We can get what we need." As he helped her onto his horse, her riding sideways in front of him, a strange feeling settled over her. It wasn't peace, not yet. But it was something close. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she wasn't running from something. She was riding toward it. The trapper's cabin was a squat, sturdy building tucked against a rock face, smoke curling lazily from its stone chimney. The owner, a mountain of a man named Jeremiah, with a beard that seemed to have a life of its own, greeted Wade like a long-lost brother. "Well, I'll be," Jeremiah rumbled, his eyes crinkling as he took in Harriet's filthy, torn wedding dress. "You finally rope one, Kincaid, and you can't even get her to the altar on time." It's complicated, Jeremiah, Wade said with a tired smile. We need supplies, enough for a few days. We're heading up to the old Everett place. Jeremiah's bushy eyebrows shot up. The Everett place? Ain't nobody been up there in a decade. Place is probably half swallowed by the prairie by now. It's where I need to be, Harriet said, her voice firm. The old trapper looked from Wade's determined face to Harriet's and seemed to understand that this was no ordinary lover's quarrel. Well then, he said, nodding, let's get you outfitted. While Wade and Jeremiah haggled over jerky, beans, and blankets, Jeremiah's wife, Martha, a woman with kind eyes and work-worn hands, took Harriet aside. You can't ride through the territory in that get-up, dear, she said gently. She handed Harriet a simple wool skirt and a worn but clean cotton blouse. These were my daughters before she moved back east. They should do you fine. In the small back room of the cabin, Harriet carefully folded her ruined wedding dress. It felt like shedding a skin. When she emerged in the simple, practical clothes, she felt lighter, more herself. Wade had traded for a second horse, a gentle mare, so they could travel faster. As they rode out, the sun beginning to dip toward the horizon, a comfortable silence settled between them. The anger and confusion had burned away, leaving a quiet space for thought. The landscape changed, the rolling hills giving way to steeper, rockier terrain. This was the land of her childhood, and with every mile, forgotten memories surfaced. They made camp that night in a hollow sheltered by pines. As she helped gather firewood, Harriet watched Wade. She watched the efficient way he moved, the way he cared for the horses before himself, the quiet respect he showed for the land. This was the man she had known, the man she had loved. You're staring, he said, not looking up from the small fire he was building. She flushed, caught. I'm trying to figure out which man is real, the one who bought my future in a back room, or the one sitting in front of me. He looked up then, the firelight dancing in his eyes, making his face a landscape of shadows and light. I'm the same man I've always been, Harriet. Flawed, for certain. A fool, sometimes, but my heart is true. And what matters most to me has always been the same. And what matters most? She asked, her voice soft. Keeping my word, he said without hesitation. Protecting those who need it. He paused, his gaze intense. And loving you. Not the way your uncle thinks you should be loved, the way you deserve to be loved. With honesty. As a partner. The words were a balm on her wounded pride. They ate their simple meal of beans and salt pork in silence, but it was no longer a tense silence. When they laid out their bedrolls, Wade placed a barrier of saddlebags between them. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was a gesture of respect. Thank you, she whispered into the darkness as she settled under her blanket. Get some rest, he replied, his voice a low rumble. We'll be there by midday tomorrow. Sleep found her easily under the vast, star-dusted canopy of the Montana sky. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The smell of coffee and wood smoke woke her. Wade was already up, tending the fire, the battered tin coffee pot perched on the flames. The simple domesticity of the scene felt so natural, so right, it made her heart ache. Morning, he said, handing her a steaming cup. Sleep well. Better than I thought I would, she admitted. I haven't slept under the stars since I was a girl. My father used to take me. Her voice trailed off. Wade's expression softened. Your father was a good man. One of the few who was kind to me when I was just a green kid on my first cattle drive. Harriet looked at him, stunned. You knew my father? He nodded, taking a sip of his own coffee. I was 17, got caught in a flash flood, separated from the herd. I was half drowned when he found me. He and your mother took me in for 3 days, no questions asked. Fed me, let me rest. I never forgot it. He never mentioned you, she whispered. A new, unexpected thread was weaving itself into the tapestry of her life. No reason he should have. I was just another stray cowboy, Wade said. But I remembered him. I remembered this valley. It's part of the reason I came back to Silver Creek. I was looking for a place to put down roots, and I remembered the kindness I was shown here. The world tilted on its axis once again. His arrival in her life wasn't an accident. It was a choice rooted in a memory of her family, of her father. This wasn't just a misunderstanding about a store. This was something deeper, something that felt like fate. They broke camp and rode on, the landscape becoming more and more familiar. She saw the rock formation that looked like a sleeping giant, the grove of aspens where she'd once seen a mother deer and her fawn. These were pieces of her, pieces she had forgotten. They crested a final ridge, and there it was, the homestead. Her breath caught. The cabin was still standing, just as she'd remembered, though its logs were silvered with age, and the porch sagged on one side. The barn had partially collapsed, its roof a skeleton against the sky. The fields her father had so carefully cleared were now overgrown with wildflowers and prairie grass. It was a ghost of a place, but it was her ghost. It was home. Wade dismounted and held up a hand to help her down. She took it, and as her feet touched the ground of her family's land for the first time in a decade, a tremor went through her. "It's smaller than I remembered," she said, her voice thick. "Things from childhood usually are," Wade replied gently. "Do you want to go inside?" She nodded, her feet moving as if in a dream. The door groaned on its rusty hinges. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunbeams, slanting through the grimy windows. A rough-hewn table and 2 chairs stood in the center of the single room. The iron bedstead where her parents had slept was against the far wall. Wade waited at the door, giving her space. She walked through the cabin, her fingers tracing lines in the thick dust on the mantelpiece, on the shelf where her mother had kept her books. She could almost see her father in his rocking chair by the cold hearth, hear her mother humming as she cooked. They were happy here, she said, the words a revelation. They had nothing. They fought droughts and blizzards and sickness. But they were happy because they were building this together. Wade stepped inside, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. He removed his hat, a gesture of respect that touched her deeply. "That's all I've ever wanted with you, Harriet," he said quietly. "Not to own you, to build with you." She turned to face him, the ghosts of the past all around them. "I want to believe you, Wade. I truly do." "Then ask me anything," he said, his gaze steady and clear. "No more secrets. No more half-truths. Just ask." They sat at the old, dusty table, the silence of the abandoned cabin a witness to their conversation. "Why the store?" she began. "The real reason." "Because it was killing you," he answered immediately. "I watched you day after day, working your fingers to the bone to keep it afloat, while your uncle drank himself into an early grave. You were trapped, Harriet. I wanted to give you the key. I wanted you to have the freedom to make it your own, without him dragging you down." It was the truth. She had felt it every day, the slow, grinding weight of that responsibility. "And the wedding?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Was that his idea?" A faint flush crept up Wade's neck. "The wedding was my idea. The timing was his. He wanted to see you settled before he left." "Settled," she repeated, the word tasting bitter. "Like a stray dog he needed to find a home for." "To him, maybe," Wade conceded. "But not to me. To me, you were never the problem. You were the answer to a lifetime of wandering, of feeling like I never belonged anywhere." The raw honesty of his words stripped away her last defense. She believed him. She saw the whole messy, beautiful truth of it. He wasn't a villain. He was just a man, deeply in love, who had trusted the wrong person to make a plan. There was one last question, the most important one. If I had said no, she asked, meeting his eyes, if I had refused your proposal, would you still have bought the store for my uncle? He didn't flinch. Yes, he said, because it was the right thing to do for you, whether you wanted me or not. I would have found a way to make sure the store was yours, free and clear, even if I had to ride out of your life forever. And in that moment everything broke open. The anger, the fear, the betrayal, it all washed away, leaving only the man in front of her, the honorable, steadfast man she had fallen in love with. I think, she said, her voice shaking slightly, I would like to start over. A flicker of hope, bright and fierce, ignited in Wade's eyes. What do you mean? She stood up and extended her hand across the dusty table as if they were strangers meeting for the very first time. My name is Harriet Everett. I am the proprietor of the Silver Creek Mercantile, and I have no intention of marrying anyone unless it is as a true and equal partner. Wade stood too and took her offered hand. His palm was calloused and warm against hers. Wade Kincaid, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. Former cowboy. And I am only interested in a strong-willed woman who knows her own mind. I'm offering my heart, my hand, and my solemn vow to never make a decision for you again. Only with you. They stood there, hands clasped, in the silent, dusty cabin. But something was wrong. As Wade smiled, his eyes flickered toward the grimy window behind her, and the smile vanished. It was replaced by a look of sharp, sudden alarm. "What is it?" she asked, turning to follow his gaze. In the distance, cresting the same ridge they had crossed not an hour before, were 3 riders. They weren't moving casually. They were riding hard, straight for the homestead. And the man in the lead was unmistakable. It was Jackson Tyler, the town bully, the man whose cruelty Wade had mentioned, the man who seemed to have a personal vendetta against anyone weaker than himself. And he was heading right for them. "Get inside," Wade said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous command. He moved to the cabin door, pulling her with him, his body shielding hers. The tender man who had just bared his soul was gone. In his place was the tough, weathered cowboy who had survived 15 years on the frontier. "What does he want?" Harriet whispered, her heart pounding against her ribs. "This land," Wade said, his eyes narrowed, scanning the approaching riders. "His family tried to swindle it from your father years ago. Your father refused to sell. I guess Jackson holds a grudge." But it felt like more than a grudge. Tyler was riding with an air of ownership, of purpose. As they drew closer, she could see the smug, cruel twist of his lips. He and his 2 hired thugs reined in their horses a few yards from the sagging porch, kicking up a cloud of dust. "Well, well," Jackson Tyler sneered, his gaze sweeping over the dilapidated cabin before landing on Harriet, then Wade. "Look what we have here. The runaway bride and the cowboy playing house. I heard you caused quite a stir in town, Everett." "This is private property, Tyler," Wade said, his voice level, but his hand resting casually near the Colt revolver on his hip. "State your business and ride out." Tyler laughed, a nasty, grating sound. "This ain't your property, Kincaid, and it ain't hers, neither. Not really. See, old man Everett might have owned it, but he left behind some unfinished business." He swung down from his horse, his men following suit, their hands also hovering near their guns. The friendly meeting was over before it began. This was a confrontation. "What business?" Harriet demanded, stepping forward from behind Wade. She would not hide. This was her home. Tyler's eyes gleamed with malice as he looked at her. "Your uncle, Frederick. A man with expensive tastes and terrible luck at cards. He owed me a great deal of money. A debt he couldn't pay. A cold dread washed over Harriet. This was the piece that had been missing. Her uncle's debts weren't just from whiskey and idle games in the town saloon. He was in deep with a man like Jackson Tyler. "So he made me a deal," Tyler continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the porch. "He couldn't give me cash, but he could give me the deed to this worthless patch of dirt. He signed it over to me yesterday morning, right before your little wedding." The world swam before Harriet's eyes. Betrayal, sharp and venomous, coiled in her gut once more. This was worse than she could have imagined. Her uncle hadn't just arranged her marriage to escape his responsibilities. He had sold her childhood home out from under her to a man he knew was their enemy. He had sold her legacy for a handful of silver. "You're a liar," Wade growled, moving to put himself between Tyler and Harriet again. "Am I?" Tyler smirked, pulling a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. He flicked it open. "The deed to the Everett homestead, signed and witnessed. This land is mine now, which means you two are trespassing." Harriet's mind raced. The store. Wade had bought the store to give her uncle the money to pay his debts, but her uncle hadn't used it for that. He had taken Wade's money and still signed away the land. He had betrayed them both. But why this land? It was nothing special. A small cabin, a collapsed barn, fields that would take years of back-breaking work to cultivate. Why would Tyler be so determined to own it? It didn't make sense. Unless... An image flashed in her mind. Her father, years ago, taking her to a hidden spot in the creek, a place where the water bubbled up from the ground, ice-cold and clear even in the hottest summer. "Our secret, Hattie," he had said. "This spring never runs dry. It's the lifeblood of this land." At the time, it was just a child's secret. But now, in the dry Montana territory where water was more precious than gold, a spring that never ran dry was a fortune. Her father had known. And somehow Tyler must have found out. He wasn't after the land. He was after the water. "There's nothing here for you, Tyler," Harriet said, finding her voice. She had to protect her father's secret. "Oh, I think there is," Tyler said, his eyes glinting. "Now, I'm going to give you two a choice. You can mount your horses and ride away, and I'll forget I ever saw you. Or you can stay, and my friends and I will have to escort you off my property." He and his men spread out, their intentions clear. They were boxing them in. There was no way out. They were outgunned 3-1. Wade could maybe take one of them, but not all three. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Harriet's shock. They had run from a misunderstanding only to land in a real, life-threatening trap. Wade's hand tightened on the grip of his Colt. He knew the odds. He was calculating, his eyes darting between the three men, looking for an opening, a mistake. But Tyler was confident, arrogant. He thought he had already won. "Last chance, Kincaid," Tyler sneered. Harriet's mind was a whirlwind. Her father's face, the secret spring, her uncle's ultimate betrayal. It was too much. But then another memory surfaced. A loose floorboard under her childhood bed. A place where she used to hide her treasures. A pretty rock, a bird's feather, a stolen biscuit. It was a long shot, a fool's hope. But it was the only hope they had. "The cabin," she whispered to Wade, her voice so low only he could hear. "Under the bed, a loose board." Wade's eyes met hers for a fraction of a second. He didn't understand, but he trusted her. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. He had to create a diversion. "You want the land, Tyler?" Wade said, his voice loud, drawing their attention. "You're going to have to earn it." And with that, he drew his gun. The world exploded in motion. Wade dove to the side, firing a shot not at Tyler, but at the ground near his feet, kicking up a spray of dirt and rock. Tyler and his men, startled, returned fire, their bullets thudding into the log walls of the cabin. That was the opening Harriet needed. While their eyes were on Wade, she scrambled through the cabin door, diving low to the floor. Gunshots echoed outside, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder. She crawled across the dusty floor to the far wall, to the spot where her small bed used to be. Her fingers scrabbled at the floorboards, searching for the familiar notch. There. She hooked her nails under the edge and pulled. The board came up with a protesting squeak. She reached into the dark, dusty space beneath. Her hand closed around something cold and hard. A small metal box. Her father's strong box. She had forgotten all about it. With trembling fingers, she lifted it out. It was heavy. She fumbled with the latch. It sprang open. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed velvet, was not a gun or gold. It was a thick bundle of papers tied with a faded ribbon, and on top of them a small silver star. A deputy's badge. She grabbed the papers and the badge, her mind racing to make sense of it. A gunshot splintered the doorframe near her head, and she screamed, dropping back to the floor. Outside, Wade was using the corner of the cabin as cover, exchanging fire with Tyler's men, who had spread out, trying to flank him. It was a losing fight. He was pinned down. Harriet looked at the papers in her hand. The top one was a legal document. She scanned the words, her eyes widening in disbelief. It wasn't a deed. It was a federal land grant, signed by the territorial governor. It granted this parcel of land and all water rights associated with it to her father, Sergeant Thomas Everett, for his service in the war. And it stated, in no uncertain terms, that the title could only be passed down through his direct bloodline. It was ironclad, indisputable. Her uncle couldn't sell it. He had no legal right. The deed Tyler held was worthless, a fraud. Her uncle hadn't just betrayed her. He had tried to commit a federal crime. Beneath the grant was a letter written in her father's hand. "My dearest Harriet," it began. "If you are reading this, I am gone, and you have found yourself in trouble. Know this, my daughter. This land is yours. It is your birthright, protected by law. The water is its heart, and you must protect it. There are men like the Tylers who know its value and will stop at nothing. Do not let them take it from you. I have registered this grant with the U.S. Marshal in Helena. They have a copy. This badge was a gift from a friend, a marshal named Abernathy. If you are ever in true danger, find him. Show him this. He will know what to do." A U.S. Marshal. Her father had powerful friends. A new cry of pain from outside jolted her back to the present. Wade. He was hit. "Give it up, Kincaid," Tyler shouted, laughing. "Your girlfriend's next." There was no time to get to Helena, no time to find a marshal. It was now or never. Harriet took a deep breath. She grabbed the deputy's badge, its silver cool against her palm. She tucked the land grant securely into her blouse. And then she stood up. She walked to the shattered doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might break. She stepped out onto the porch, into the tense, smoke-filled standoff. The shooting stopped. 3 sets of surprised, hostile eyes turned to her. Wade was slumped against the cabin wall, blood seeping through his shirt on his left arm, but he was alive, his gun still held steady. "The girl's got a death wish," one of Tyler's men muttered. Harriet ignored him. She held up her hand, the silver star gleaming in the afternoon sun. She pinned it to her blouse, right over her heart. "Jackson Tyler," she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing with an authority she didn't know she possessed. "In my capacity as a duly sworn representative of the United States Marshal Service, I am placing you and your men under arrest." For a moment there was complete, stunned silence. Tyler stared at the badge, then at her face, a look of utter disbelief twisting his features. "You?" he finally choked out, and then he threw his head back and roared with laughter. "You? A deputy? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." This homestead is under federal protection, Harriet continued, her voice not wavering, even as her insides turned to water. She was bluffing. She was running the biggest, most dangerous bluff of her life. This land grant, signed by the governor, supersedes any local deed. The document you hold is a forgery, obtained through coercion from a man who had no legal right to sell. That's a federal offense. She saw a flicker of doubt in the eyes of Tyler's men. They were hired thugs, not lawyers. Federal offense, U.S. Marshal. Those were powerful, dangerous words. She's lying, Tyler snarled, but his own confidence was shaken. There's no grant. She's crazy. The original is filed with Marshal Abernathy in Helena, Harriet said, pulling the document from her blouse just enough for them to see the official seal at the bottom. He's an old friend of my father's. In fact, I expect he and a posse of his finest men will be riding through here any day now on a routine patrol. He does so enjoy checking in on his old friend's property. Imagine his surprise when he finds you here, attempting to defraud and murder his friend's only daughter. The two hired guns looked at each other, then back at Tyler. This was not what they had signed up for. A simple land grab against a lone woman and a cowboy was one thing. A shootout with a U.S. Marshal's posse was another thing entirely. "Don't listen to her!" Tyler screamed, his face turning purple with rage. He was losing control. "She's nobody! Shoot her!" But his men hesitated. They hadn't seen the fear in Harriet's eyes. They had only seen the badge, the official-looking paper, and the unwavering steel in her voice. "You want to hang for killing a federal officer?" Wade grunted from his position, playing along perfectly. "Because I guarantee you that's what will happen." That was it. That was the tipping point. One of the men lowered his gun. "This ain't worth it, boss," he said nervously. "Federal marshals. That's a whole other game." The other man nodded, already backing toward his horse. "He's right. I'm out." "Cowards!" Tyler shrieked, his plan unraveling before his eyes. He raised his own pistol, his wild eyes fixing on Harriet. "If I can't have this land, no one will." He fired, but he was blind with rage, his aim wild. The bullet whizzed past Harriet's ear, burying itself in the doorframe behind her. And in that split second, Wade moved. Ignoring the pain in his arm, he launched himself from the wall, tackling Tyler around the waist. The two men went down in a tangle of limbs, wrestling in the dust for control of the gun. It went off again, the shot harmlessly blasting into the sky. Tyler's men didn't wait to see the outcome. They scrambled onto their horses and galloped away, leaving their boss to his fate. Wade, stronger and more skilled, quickly gained the upper hand. A solid punch to Tyler's jaw sent the man sprawling. The gun skittered across the dirt. Wade kicked it away and stood over Tyler, his chest heaving, his own gun now pointed squarely at the other man's head. It was over. Silence descended on the homestead, broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing and the whisper of the wind through the prairie grass. Harriet rushed to Wade's side, her eyes immediately going to his arm. "You're hurt." "It's just a graze," he said, not taking his eyes off the defeated man on the ground. "Are you all right?" She nodded, her body trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline and terror. She looked down at Jackson Tyler, who was staring up at her with a mixture of hatred and awe. You tricked me," he stammered. "No," Harriet said, her voice cold as ice. "I just showed you who my father was, and who I am." They tied Tyler up with rope from their saddlebags and left him on the porch. They would ride to the nearest town with the sheriff, not Silver Creek, and turn him in, along with the fraudulent deed and her father's land grant. Justice would be served. But first, Harriet tended to Wade's arm, her touch gentle as she cleaned and bandaged the wound with a strip of cloth torn from her petticoat. "That was the bravest thing I have ever seen," Wade said quietly, watching her work. You saved us, Harriet. We saved each other, she replied, meeting his gaze. The dust, the blood, the fear. It had all burned away the last of her doubts. In the face of real danger, they had trusted each other. They had fought together. They had become a partnership. When his arm was bandaged, Wade stood up and walked into the cabin. He returned a moment later with her ruined wedding dress, which he had carefully hung on a peg to air out. He held it out to her. "I believe we have a wedding to finish," he said, a slow, gentle smile spreading across his face. Harriet looked at the dress, then back at him. She thought of the church, the whispers, the misunderstanding, and she shook her head. "I ran from a wedding that felt like a business deal, Wade," she said softly. "I'm not running from you. Not anymore. What we have is real. It's been tested by fire. It doesn't need a church or a preacher." She took his uninjured hand, her fingers lacing with his. "This is our church, this land, this home that we fought for." They stood on the sagging porch of the cabin, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. With the bound and gagged villain as their only witness, they made their vows. Not the traditional words from a book, but promises from their own hearts, forged in the chaos of the day. "I, Wade Kincaid," he began, his voice steady and true, "take you, Harriet Everett, as my partner, in rebuilding this home, in facing down bullies, and in all the quiet days in between. I promise to always listen to you, to always trust you, and to never, ever keep a secret from you again. My soul recognized yours a long time ago. Today, my heart makes it official." Tears streamed down Harriet's face, but for the first time that day they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "I, Harriet Everett," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "choose you, Wade Kincaid, as my home. I promise to be your partner, to stand by your side, and to build a life with you that is honest and true. My heart was afraid, but it sees you now. It chooses you." As the first star blinked into existence in the twilight sky, Wade drew her into his arms. He kissed her, not with the desperation of their reunion by the creek, but with the certainty of a shared future, a future they had nearly lost, and had fought tooth and nail to reclaim. 6 months later, the homestead was unrecognizable. The cabin was repaired and expanded, with a new, sturdy porch. The barn was rebuilt. A vegetable garden flourished, and the first rows of a new apple orchard had been planted. The spring, her father's secret, provided them with all the water they needed. In town, Harriet and Wade ran the mercantile together. It was now Kincaid and Everett, a testament to their partnership. They were a force to be reckoned with, respected and admired. Her uncle, consumed by shame, had taken Wade's money and disappeared, never to be heard from again. Jackson Tyler was serving a long sentence for fraud and attempted murder. On a crisp autumn day, they threw a party at the homestead. They called it a wedding celebration, a formality for their friends from town, but for them it was an anniversary. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house looked around at the transformed property, shaking her head in amazement. "You two have built a paradise out of a ruin," she said. Harriet, her hand tucked in the crook of Wade's arm, smiled. "We're just getting started," she said. Later, as the party swirled around them, Wade led her to the small apple tree they had planted first. He handed her a small leather-bound journal. "A wedding gift," he said, "for our story, the real one." She opened it. On the first page, in his strong, clear handwriting, he had written, "The Chronicles of Harriet and Wade, partners." "Our story," she whispered, tracing the words. "The one that almost didn't happen." Wade shook his head, drawing her close. "No," he said, his lips brushing her hair. "The one that was always meant to be. We just had to fight for it." And in the years that followed, they filled that journal. They filled it with the birth of their children, with the growth of their home, with the challenges and the triumphs of a life built together. They had turned a desperate escape into a beautiful beginning, proving that sometimes the longest, most dangerous road is the one that finally leads you home. If you enjoyed Harriet and Wade's incredible journey from misunderstanding to true partnership, and you love stories where justice finds a way, do me a favor. Hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of the unexpected.